Hi, my name is Ben Sills, and in this presentation we're going to be looking at some of the key drivers that determine a successful implementation of a learning platform. Learning platforms have gone through a whirlwind of change over the last 5 years, and with a wealth of new functionality and features being made available to schools. But is that enough? We can all be wowed from time to time by those features, but what makes the difference is the effectiveness of it and the value it adds to your school's teaching and learning. Throughout this presentation, we're going to have a look at some of the key drivers that ensure that success and make it sustainable. Let's hear from some of the teachers at Dame Alice Owen School about their experiences.
As the Deputy Head in charge of teaching and learning, I've been really keen to use technology to help students to learn both within the classroom and beyond the classroom. And as a senior leadership team, we've also been very much in favour of that, and so much so that we have been looking to develop the use of Life as part of our school improvement plan.
What we're trying to do really is give them a range of things. So we do use it as a resource bank still because it's one of its most useful functions for us, but we also use some of the learning resources on it. We're using Posties quite a lot at the moment for students to kind of pin up things that they think are interesting. I've used that doing some research where they sort of put up a website or a book that they've used, and also forums we're using a lot for reading and students being able to have their own conversations.
We'll be hearing more from those teachers a little later on in the presentation. Now we're going to sort of set the context for the school and just give you a bit of information about the school and tell you how they came to the decisions they've come to. So Dame Alice Owen is a very high performing North London academy. It's spent 6 years using our existing learning platform, the CLC, which they'll refer to within their videos. And what they're looking for is embracing change. They're looking at a way of trying to develop their online technologies for the future, and they were really interested in the idea of learning inside and outside the classroom to equip learners with their lifelong skills. Let's start to take a look at some of the key drivers that ensured some of that success. At Dame Alice Owen, our first step was to do a full and comprehensive review of their CLC use and other features of their online technologies. So they started with a departmental review. That departmental review looked at some of the key ideas of how that was being used within the department, the key members of staff that were using it, and the successes they were getting. They also looked at their structure, a really important feature, because it allowed them to think about how they could streamline potentially very difficult areas and also make things easier to access and easier to use for students and staff alike. The next step was to look at the practicalities. How were these going to be implemented? What sort of features were going to be used? Who by and when? All these sorts of things needed to be thought through very carefully. The next step was to look at some of the technology that was being used within the school itself. So they would look at their wireless internet connections, they looked at their computers and PCs and suites, and looked to see whether they were fit for purpose for a new platform for the next 20 years or so. And the last step was to have a look at the connectivity within the school. So for example, they had to check whether the internet was accessible throughout different parts of the school, and they upgraded some of their web services too. It's important to remember that a change in technology doesn't always solve existing problems. We're going to now have a look and listen to two members of staff of Dame Alice Owen talk about why they started with their structure, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail here.
Starting point for our VLE review was we wanted to look at where we got with CLC, and I think that while we were happy with a lot of the functionality that was within it, we'd certainly come to realise that the thing had got slightly unwieldy because departments had different structures and some of them were phenomenally complex, and we saw this as an opportunity to make sure we didn't repeat that mistake. And the good thing about Life is that it does actually allow you to have a much sort of more organised, flatter structure to your VLE.
We decided to look at the existing structure, see which departments were using it, how they were using it, and where we could simplify the structure to make it easier for staff to add materials so that they would be much more keen to use it and would then promote it amongst their students and in their teaching and learning.
This brings us nicely onto the next of our key drivers, and that's the structure of your learning platform. As you heard from Steve in the video just before, it was a key consideration for the school because, like your own, a VLE grows quite organically, and over time you would have built up structures and substructures within it. What it allowed us to do at Dame Alice Owen was to review that structure, to simplify it, and to be allowed to create a simple structure that was easy to navigate, have a common recognisable structure for different stakeholders, for students and for staff to work around, and also to support a common approach to training. Throughout our extensive experience working with learning platforms, one of the things that really is one of the top priorities in terms of your key drivers is the backing that it gets, and particularly the backing that it gets from your senior leadership team. In order to make a successful and sustainable learning platform, it really needs to be embedded in the school development plan, which means it's going to involve not only your senior leadership team's approval and direction, but also going to involve other members of staff too. So as well as the senior leadership team, it's probably a really good idea to put together a steering group of people that represent members of the teaching staff, the senior leadership team, technical staff, and maybe even students as well. Beyond that, you might be wanting to think about initial champions, and we'll be seeing a little bit more of that later on in the presentation. But these champions are the key drivers for how a learning platform is used in the classroom. It may well be one of those teachers who shows expertise, but it also might be somebody who shows confidence and is willing to share things as well. The last bit would also be a key successful element of that driving, and that's the ability and the opportunity to share that vision and practice with the staff. Involve your staff. Don't see them as being separate from it, because they're going to be the ones that use it at the end of the day. Let's hear from John Godfrey, the Deputy Head of Dame Alice Owen School.
As a school, we're very much involved with helping students to become lifelong learners, and one of the things that we have been trying to develop is learning beyond the classroom, and Life has helped us to do that. We have on our school improvement plan this year a target to extend learning beyond the classroom, and one of those areas is actually the introduction of Life in the school.
The next of our key drivers is to do with planning. When you're planning your implementation of your learning platform, it's really important to start thinking small to start with. So think manageable, think small, think groups of teachers, and this is where your champions may well come in. We're going to start small, and we're then going to start to think big. So as we grow in our learning platform usage, we also start to think more widely in the way it's going to be used across the school. We'll also need to think long term as well, on what do we want to try and achieve in, say, 6 to 12 months time. Having these planned out as steps for you and your learning platform will help to ensure that it's sustainable and a success at the school. Another key part of your planning will be to think about your implementation plan, and that will start to think about those initial projects that you are going to be using at your school. As you can see from this example on the screen, we had to think about very carefully who was going to be involved, what was going to be achieved, the time scale for that, and also what we decided was the success criteria or the evidence of impact. The next of our key drivers concerns the support mechanisms that you put in place to ensure that your learning platform is a success. We've already briefly introduced you to the idea of a champions model and a steering group, but it's really important to think long term as well. After your initial training, you're going to want to think about opportunities of staff in the long term and to help sustain your learning platform over a longer period. Things like drop-in sessions, which allow staff to be able to meet with experts and to be able to find out about new pieces of functionality or to review their existing usage. Be able to perhaps have an audit of their skills and to find out what needs to be improved and what sort of things can be added to their skill set. Maybe even involving people like digital leaders to support members of staff and to support teaching and learning in the classroom. Your champions will be the ones who lead and dictate how things work in the long term as well. So having the opportunities for them to share what their expertise is and also some of their successes with staff cannot really be underestimated. At Dame Alice Owen School, one of their sustainable key drivers was their PLP sessions, their personalised learning programme sessions. Let's listen to Sheila talking about them.
The senior leadership team allowed us to put the training into our personalised learning sessions so that everybody on the staff signed up for at least one session which was an introduction to life, and this was very, very important because of the underlying support of the senior leadership team in building this into the essential staff training within the school.
We're now going to take a more detailed look at the Champions model that Dame Alice Owen School used to implement their life learning platform. What was really key about the choice of the staff that they took for those champions was 4 key aspects. First, they needed to be able to enthuse. So one of their key roles was to be able to share their practices with others and to make sure that they were encouraging that use within their own department. They also chose natural leaders as well. These people who were able to put together programs but also be able to drive that particular usage within their subject area or within their department or across departments. They would also pioneer new functionality. So within the action plan, they were usually the ones that were furthest ahead. They were the ones who were using different types of technology and experimenting and trying it out with their students. And also they were given opportunities to share what they were doing with their staff colleagues and across the wider school. Let's take a moment to actually hear from those champions and their role.
Okay, so my role as a life champion then really has 2 parts to it. So it's partly in my own department, kind of putting together my own practice and trying out different functions on the VLE, and then there's also a wider school role to it, which is about running training sessions, which here we call personalised learning sessions for the staff. We're running 5 of those over the course of the school year. People come along to those and we're running different things in different sessions. So either we're starting from scratch, even as basic as logging on, finding your own department, going around my site, or we're doing slightly more advanced things depending on where people have got to themselves, be it loading pages or loading resources or setting up links or hyperlinks, or even using some of the learning resources like the posties and the life pages and that kind of thing.
Throughout this presentation so far, we have seen some of how the key drivers work. But what's also really important is to make sure that you take regular opportunities to stop, to review and to evaluate your successes so far. These will help you to inform you as to what you might be doing next, and also to be able to think about what's going right, what's going wrong, and how to improve those things. Successful implementation of learning platforms looks at varieties of ways in using it. So you might want to think beyond the academic and start to think about the way in which your learning platform can support your pastoral care in your school. Also think about ways in which you can use it to celebrate successes, things like your performances and your exhibitions, things like that. Works wonders when you're talking to parents and sharing things with other stakeholders too. Also involve your students. Get them out owning certain areas of it. Think about school council areas or areas in which they can take charge of that learning platform space. But above all, think about ways in which you can use it to communicate and collaborate across different departments and maybe even beyond the boundaries of your school. Let's hear from one of the students at Dame Alice Owen and how excited they are about using the Life Learning platform.
Life Cloud is basically the fact that you can make your own site and you can feel proud that you made your own site, and you can create forums about it and you can say, wow, I just made that, and then other people can come and, you know, post things about it and say, this page is really good and well done, you know, you've spent, I can tell you've spent a long time working on that.
Okay, let's take a moment to recap on what we've seen and also some things for you to take away from this presentation. Firstly, know what the purpose is of your VLE. At the end of the day, a VLE is just another piece of technology and is only as good as the purpose to which it's being put. Think about how your VLE is being steered and driven. It needs to be backed by people, and particularly your senior leadership team. Involve your stakeholders, not only your staff in terms of the vision, but also your students, your parents, and maybe even other bodies as well, like the governing body. Widen the VLE scope. Think about beyond the academic. Think about pastoral, think about the celebrations that we mentioned earlier. But also, above all, make it your own. Make it part and parcel of your school. Let's finish off by listening to some of the teachers at Dame Alice Owen School and the impact that the Life Learning Platform is having at their school.
As a school, we're very much involved with helping students to become lifelong learners, and one of the things that we have been trying to develop is learning beyond the classroom, and Life has helped us to do that.
One of our requirements now is that Year 12s and 13s actually post a comment about the thing that they've read, as well as read it for a discussion in class. I find that really useful for them, and the impact it has is that they've actually thought through their opinions on something before they come to a class discussion, and therefore I think the quality of class discussions are actually a lot higher than they would have been before.
The consultation process, it was essential to ensuring the successful introduction of Life. Bearing in mind that two people are sort of very concerned about, moving over from something they'd worked on for several years. The first thing we did was we sat down with the consultants from university, and they sort of talked us through how we should go about introducing Life. And very often it was excellent because they would rein us in, and because we were trying to be too ambitious too early on. And that certainly helped us to focus our minds on how we should go about the process. They also got us to identify key people in the school who could bring their enthusiasm to the introduction, which they could then spread amongst the departments. And with the improved Life, we even managed to get on board people who originally were quite sort of negative about the change, and that was very successful.